Um, so I hope you all had a good time last night. And those of you who were in Baltimore, I'm sorry to hear that the flights from Baltimore weren't working too well. But I am pleased that a number of you have persevered and you're here nonetheless. So can we get people to stop eating? Right. There's the irresistibility of food. All right, here we go. So I'm very pleased that we have an opportunity to have a keynote speaker this morning who is a former student at this very university, Harvard University, Nick Melvoin, who is currently a member of the school board in Los Angeles and has agreed to travel all the way from the West Coast to be here with us today. So I'm very grateful to Nick for doing this. Now, Nick actually, this is not only a student at Harvard, but he will publicly affirm that he took a course from me, which very, very few people are willing to say. So especially Harvard students these days. So, so I'm really grateful that he not only took a course on the politics of education, but he actually saw a way of changing the politics of education, got involved in educational reform in Los Angeles, and fought the fight to fight the entrenched interests in the city, and won a place on the school board about 5 years ago. Now, anytime a group of reformers win an election, you know that the next election they're doomed because they're fighting interests that are well entrenched and they don't like to lose. So just this past year, we had the second election, and Nick won by 60%. In California, they have a rule that says you have primaries and generals. Anybody can run in the primaries, and the top two go in the generals. But if you win 50% in the primary, no general. So there's no general for Nick. So he did it all. He beat two opponents so handsomely. He's home free. So, and I'm very excited that he has brought to Los Angeles my favorite school superintendent, who is Alberto Carvalho, who was the superintendent of schools for the city of Miami or the Dade County in Florida, and was there 14 years and really has made tremendous strides with that school system. If you look at the data and not cooked up data, but independent data on what's been happening in Miami-Dade, you can see that it's one of the most successful superintendencies that we've had in recent years, if not the most, I would argue the most. So how do you get somebody like that to leave and come to Los Angeles? Oh, it was done. And the lead figure who managed to persuade the superintendent to come to Los Angeles is with us today. So I'm very pleased. And I want to also mention one last little detail. He's now a happily married young man. So Nick, it's all yours.
Yes, that was the agreement to my now wife. The election was in June, and the wedding was in July. And if I didn't win outright, I don't think the marriage would have happened. So, thank you. It's great to be here. I never know whether to thank or blame Paul because it was his influence that set me on this trajectory that led to being stuck on the school board. So, but I will say one thing that I will give him credit for. No blame there, as he just alluded to, is it was 11 months ago at the PepG conference in New York that I did meet Alberto, and there are some witnesses here who saw it unfold, and was able to convince, said, I'm going to get you to LA. And I think there were a few of you, maybe even in this room, who said, no way. And thanks to your collective influence, he is now stuck with me in Los Angeles. But great to be here, and really appreciated hearing some of the conversations yesterday. I'm going to talk a little bit, or was asked to talk about how can these non-traditional and emerging models work with school boards. And I think in LA, we have a lot of examples of what not to do. So can navigate that a little bit, but talk about some promising opportunities. And I do think we're at a point with the superintendent, many of whom many of you have worked with him, and a board that with his leadership has kind of come more into line. There are some opportunities, even in an entrenched system like Los Angeles. So I always like to start conversations by zooming out, just because, like so many people who, even if we don't acknowledge it, our own trajectories began with school choice before we even had the vernacular really to know what we were talking about. And so in my instance, my family, my name is Nick Melvoin. Our original name was Melvoin. It was a German name that meant flower maggot. Jews in the old country, which was this old country for my family, was a little town called Brody, that depending on what year it was either Poland or Germany or Poland or Germany. And Jews in the old country had to buy their names. We did not have a lot of money. If you were a rich Jew, you could get Goldberg or Goldstein, but we got Melvoin, flower maggot. And I always wish that my great-grandfather was still alive, because I've always wanted to ask, just like, what else was available? I realized we weren't flush with cash, but like, what else could we have gotten? But so he came to this country at the turn of the last century, was in a New York City public school as a kindergartner. His teacher asked his name. He said Charles Melvoin. The teacher heard Charles Melvoin, wrote it down. And when he got home, his parents said, well, I guess Melvoin is our name now, because the public school, the school teacher said that. And I think it's, seeing some nods. I mean, it's so true that the way you were able to succeed in this country, whether you're an immigrant today, like those I taught in South LA, or my family 100 years ago, the power and the pronouncement of the school was so informative that we changed our entire name. When I started in Los Angeles on the west side of LA, my parents were proud products of public school, but the local public school wasn't working for them. And so before I had the vocabulary, the vernacular, to know it, ended up at private school, and my family availed themselves of school choice. And I think I joined many of you and was talking to the lieutenant governor last night about being so frustrated, as a Democrat, with my fellow Democrats who will not acknowledge that the most insidious form of school choice is where you buy your home and your local public school. And I hear so many times from constituents, oh, these charter schools or these virtual schools or these vouchers, I just go to my neighborhood school. And when I show them the maps of our attendance zones in Los Angeles and redlining maps from the 50s and the 60s, they are perfect overlay. And so, one of my challenges, and I think we've been relatively successful, as Paul mentioned, with my recent reelection, has been trying to point out the hypocrisy to my friends and colleagues on the left about school choice, and about what we mean when we say you get to choose because you have the ability to buy a home in a nice neighborhood. But they don't get to choose because you don't want them to go to a charter school or virtual school or an online school. And what progressive movement would base a kid's educational attainment on the ability of their parents to buy a house? So we've been doing a lot of that in LA. It was actually on this first campus in Paul's class that I was able to guest lecture in yesterday that I first heard the term charter school. And I remember when I graduated the college in 2008. I joined Teach for America, like many other, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed students, and they got placed back in LA, and they said, "You want to be in a charter school or a district school?" And I, again, didn't know much about charter schools, but they sounded bougie to me, like, oh, they have their shit together, But so I ended up in an LAUSD district school, and I also I'll say as an aside too, just on my tangent of frustration with the left, but Teach for America and similar programs get a lot of flack these days for being a charter generator. When I joined Teach for America in Los Angeles, about 80% of our teachers, myself included, were in LA Unified District schools. It was 2008, 2009 when the recession led to the layoff in California based on seniority, last in, first out of all of these teachers. So where did these teachers go? Who was willing to avail themselves of these, in many cases, effective educators were charter schools. And now that dichotomy, completely flipped. And so there's just a series, I think, of self-inflicted wounds with school districts like that, where you had this pipeline of talent, and then, through these antiquated, anti-kid laws like seniority, they all end up at charter schools. And then the unions will say, oh, Teach for America is just in the pocket of these charter schools. Well, it's really these policy decisions that led to that. And it wasn't that until I taught 7th and 8th grade, and it wasn't until I was dealing with my 8th grade families that I really got back engaged with charters, because they were coming to me looking for great high school options. The high school that my students would feed into, Jordan High School in Watts, had an 18% A through G, C or better rate. And so for those not familiar with California vernacular, that means that 82% of kids weren't even eligible to go to Cal State LA at the local high school. And so I just did some research, went online, saw some, in this case, it was Alliance charter schools, some Green Dot charter schools, and helped my kids apply. And there I learned a lesson that has been relearned time and time again, just knocking on doors in LA, whether it's in Bel Air or in Compton, and I know this is so familiar to this group, is that people are out there Googling what's the best charter school, what's the best alternative school, what's the best magnet school, they're just looking for the best school for their families. And this hit home for me too when I was on the board of a small charter school in LA, and one of our board members and founding parents had two sons, one of whom was an artist and the other was a baseball player. And the charter school that we were on the board of, like many in LA, was, at a kind of strip mall, not the best facility. And so her son, who was the baseball player, she sent to the local public school and got a lot of flack from people. Why are you're involved with this charter school? Why are you sending to the traditional district school? And it just, for her, it was a no-brainer. This is the right fit for that child. And so, I think that the observation early in my career, both as a teacher and then as an elected official in LA, that, and the Lieutenant Governor alluded to this last night, that families are just so much beyond where we are as policymakers and adults and politicians about these decisions. They're not categorizing things the way we are. I guarantee you that most of the parents in LA don't know what school they're at, if it's a charter school, a district school, a magnet school. And so how do we as the system kind of catch up and meet them where they are? So in addition to the observation that that families are way beyond policymakers on this, I've also seen and strengthened my resolve that collaboration between these school models leads to better results for kids than contention. And just to give you a sense of where we're at in LA and the world that I was immersed into, and I said this to some students yesterday, and it always, it's laughable if it weren't so sad. So there's there's a consortium of academic researchers around the world that are looking at education in conflict zones, and they're looking at 3 areas of the world. Northern Ireland, Catholics and Protestants, about 85% of kids in Northern Ireland still go to segregated schools. They're looking at Israel and Palestine, and they're looking at Los Angeles charter schools and the teachers union. So the level of conflict in LA is so high that it makes it on this list with Middle East peace. But some of these researchers from Northern Ireland will come into LA and go to co-located charter school campuses, and the toxicity will be higher than what they've seen maybe since the Troubles. So that's the world that I got elected to a few years ago. And, but I'm here in the next few minutes, not to talk about what doesn't work, but to talk about what works and trying to realign incentives so that we can inculcate some of these new values and make sure that that all kids succeed. And so, I got sworn in July, and the next month, the school year started. One of the first schools I visited was a co-located school campus that had a charter school, a district school, and what we call a pilot school, which is a teacher-led school. And actually, I got the then superintendent, a woman named Dr. Michelle King, to join me in writing an op-ed along with these 3 principals the first day of the school year. This is back in 2017, to talk about the benefits of collaboration. And so I just want to elucidate a little bit in this school in particular, like how this worked out. If you have the toxicity of most of these co-locations where there's, yelling at each other over the fences. This one was one where they actually figured out a world, of cooperation. One of the ways they did that is by jointly applying at our suggestion for a Promise Neighborhood grant from the Obama administration, these place-based grants really, based on the Harlem Children's Zone and other reforms. it provided them with a shared team, these three schools of college advisors who worked to support all their students through the application process, and they got a 97% FAFSA completion rate that first year. They hosted events where colleges and universities came by, and whereas a college might not come for a school, it was 150, 160 kids. When you have this complex, it was more bang for their buck. So after the end of that first year with this shared resources of college counselors, all three schools had 94% of their senior classes accepted to 2 or 4-year colleges. And this is a school complex where 2 of the schools had 96% of their students qualifying for free and reduced price lunch, and the third had 87%. So just in that, saying, let's apply for some federal money together, let's have our students attend these things together, that quick little course correction was able to lead to dramatic results for these kids. It created a more unifying environment too for their staffs that really trickled down into the day-to-day experience of their kids. And this led to my first summer in office hosting what we called a co-location summit. California, something called Prop 39 in California, which is under the auspices of public school space, should be for all public school students. Charter schools can apply for space, but LA has had a very contentious way of doing it with these co-locations that's really trying to set all people up for failure, in my opinion. And so you have, a campus and there's 4 classrooms in the back, and instead of trying to do different partitions, the district for years would say the charter gets those 4 classrooms and those 2 classrooms and just tries to make everyone's life quite difficult. And so I worked with some local philanthropists and got money for a very simple idea, which is like, let's just take everyone out of town for a night in these co-located schools. Let's have them get to know each other. Let's buy them dinner. Let's, have some team building and some bonding and see what happens. And again, not rocket science, but being in these tables, some of these co-located schools had been co-located for a decade, and it was the first time, as they put it to me, that they were given permission to talk to the other person, or to understand someone's origin story. And it was amazing how many of the charter operators got to, if there's a bias against the district, that these are all bureaucrats who don't want to help kids, they were able to see, no, that's not true. If the district folks were like, oh, these charter folks are corporate privatizers who don't care about kids, they realized how many of the charter operators were former district staffers who just got so frustrated with the district that they left. And again, over the course of what was really 36 hours, we saw this permission to be nice to one another and to figure out what are some joint things we can do together. Let's apply for this grant. Let's fix that gate in the back. Let's go talk to the local city councilman about the homeless encampments around the city. And it just completely changed the culture. And again, very simple, but there had been no incentive for them to do this. There had not even been the permission. If anything, it was the opposite, kind of the tacit idea that you're not allowed to talk to one another. The insight that I gained from this retreat led my office to create a policy that we're now calling co-location grants. So we set aside a few $1 million every year that co-located schools can apply for together, but they have to have both names of the schools on the application for shared, usually facilities, but like any kind of school improvement project. And to give you a sense of how unifying this was for the district, my co-sponsor on this resolution was a woman who was actually on the school board before I was born, and came back and is a staunch anti-charter person. But for her, so we came at this for different reasons. For her, it was to help the district school, who she thinks is getting screwed because of charters. For me, it was to try to help all kids on the campus. But she saw the benefits of, maybe this War of the Roses is not helping anybody. And so we brought it together, it passed unanimously, and now schools get these grants of around $100,000 for everything, new projector in the auditorium, to new lunch tables, to shared college counselor. And again, we're just seeing the benefits of those little, not huge investments, but just the idea that, oh, there's money on the table. If we apply for it together, we have to sit down together. We have to, and that's led, excuse me, anecdotally talking to these principals, because of that, they had to sit down and have a meeting. And then they said, oh, this isn't so bad. Maybe we should meet more regularly. And we're seeing a lot more collaboration on these co-located campuses. This actually, one of the schools that had one of the more contentious co-locations, I got a call during the teacher strike of 2019 that the charter teachers at that school who weren't on strike actually brought donuts to the striking district teachers on the picket line, which, I wasn't thrilled that there was a strike at all, but that was a nice little moment of reminded me of the, like German and British forces playing soccer in World War I, on like Christmas Eve, like coming out of the foxholes of the trenches. So we got to see some of that little collaboration. Another example that we've done in LA specifically is a partnership between Crown Prep Academy, which is a charter school, and 24th Street Elementary, which is a traditional school. We have this parent trigger law, or really did, it's kind of defunct in California, where parents can pull the trigger to reform or reconstitute a school. And parents at 24th Street, which is the local district elementary school, voted to pull this parent trigger and take over the school. Usually these have led to more acrimonious and contentious fights, for somewhat obvious reasons. But in this case, they requested that Crown Prep be in the same building as the elementary school and join the district in a partnership model. So, and the model which we approved a few years ago is that the district reconstituted the elementary school just as a K through 4. And then the students would automatically attend 10 Crown Prep, which is 5 through 8 after. So you have a built-in pathway where kids are at a traditional district school for the early grades, and then going through this, what was a middle school, and added a few extra grades to serve the community. I think that one of the reasons that collaboration remains difficult in districts like ours is because the incentives aren't there. The incentives aren't there for districts, but quite honestly, the incentives aren't there for charter operators too. And I think we forget, both districts, but I'll say some of my charter friends as well, will forget the real origin of the charter movement, which was to spur district-wide reform. It was not, some of you may disagree. In my mind, it was never to create a shadow system. LA, but we have more charters than anywhere in the country. We have 20% of kids are in charter schools. We have about 280 charter schools. To me, it's as much as I support charters, it's a huge indictment of the school district that you had to start 240 additional schools, just to serve kids well. And so thinking about how can we realign incentives to spur some of this healthy competition and collaboration, as opposed to and this war of the roses and this idea where it's the zero-sum game. And I think one of the challenges for that, for LA Unified for years, had been we had been losing enrollment and just had our head in the sand as a district. So it was this zero-sum game because we were losing space and we had this Prop 39 co-locations. And so finally, with the leadership of our new superintendent, we've been able to look down the horizon and say, how do we right size? How do we consolidate in a way that we're not always seen as fighting for students? And I'm a big believer of the if you can't beat them, join them type mentality, and how can we bring some of these in the fold and let them flourish. So a few just ideas of ways that we are trying to continue to incentivize this, and then would love to answer some questions. But one is, especially as we're trying to create a new school performance metric, this was one of the things that I had brought to the district when I got elected. The board dynamics flipped, it was repealed, but looking at not just individual school achievement, but community achievement as part of a way to incentivize school collaboration. Looking at not just in the example I gave about those 3 schools, not just how are each individual school doing, but how is the complex doing? And this is something, I actually wrote a paper about this about 8 years ago when I was in law school about, what if we, as part of an evaluation system, 10%, 12% looked at community achievement. And a lot of the school operators, both traditional and charter, non-traditional, didn't like that idea because you don't want to be responsible for something that's out of your control. But my argument to them was, well, then make it in your control. Like, start to collaborate. If you have a great professional development opportunity, share that with the co-located teachers, and let's have a little skin in the game. We have broken up the district into these 44 communities of schools, as we're calling them, as part of this more portfolio-based model. I've not been successful yet, but I'm trying to get the local charter schools as part of those communities of schools. So when you have meetings, about K-12 articulation, why isn't the charter school in the room? And when we're looking at community of schools achievement, why isn't the charter school part of that conversation? There are some examples in states where I know some of you are from that do this better. We'll use charters to our advantage when we want to. Well, if we're declining enrollment, but we still want to say we're a 700,000 student district, we'll use independent charters in our numbers. But then we don't always do that on the achievement side. And I think it's Texas is one of the states that uses in some of the data reporting the aggregate scores of both district and charter schools as like district achievement levels. And to me, that's one of those ideas as a way to incentivize better collaboration and really trying to get every school vested in the success of all kids in the community. I'll just say a few more things. So, we have this whole if you can't beat them, join them. We've actually done a lot of in-district innovation in ways that I don't think LA Unified gets credit for. We had the Public School Choice Initiative a few years ago, where when we built new schools, we let charter operators bid on for them. We've really tried to uh, bring innovative new pathways, dual language programs. We now, on the west side of LA alone, have dual language, Spanish, Mandarin, French, Korean. We just opened a Japanese program, and we're seeing people permit in from some of the other local school districts in LA, like Beverly Hills and Culver City, to go to these programs. And I get the same story from parents every time, which is when they go to these offices, the office is like, don't you want to permit the other way? Like Beverly Hills is not used to signing permits to let people go to LA Unified. It's usually the opposite direction. We have the first public STEM all-girls school in the state of California, the GALA, the Girls Academic Leadership Academy, which has a wait list now of 800 students and is a perfect example of a principal who had been with the district for about 12 years at this school, wanted to create an all-girls school focused on STEM and STEAM, was this close to going to start a charter school because there's just no way to innovate in big districts. And Superintendent Ray Cortinez, who'd been LA superintendent like 3 times over 20 years, just said to her, no, just do it. And kind of got the school board to go along and created this, now one of our flagship schools, all girls STEAM Academy. We let's see what a few things just relevant to this conference too. One of the things that I was unsuccessful at but really tried to do is create district run micro schools or pods during the pandemic. Again, this whole if you can't beat them, join them. What I was seeing when schools were closed is that families in my district on the west side and the West Valley had running these pods and had these tutors. And so we had teachers, we had teachers' aides, we had school space, we had food. Why weren't we bringing kids on campus? And even if the whole school system was shut down, and serving kids, homeless youth, foster youth, kids with special needs in our own pod system. And unfortunately, because the union wasn't on board, we never really got off the ground. We were able to serve about 1% of kids in person during those school closures. But to me, that's not an idea I've given up on when we think about kids coming back to the traditional school system, but are still having these supports through tutoring, through pods. Why aren't we doing our own version? And a lot of this, I saw this, I think, in charter models and in Jeffrey Canada's Harlem Children's Zone. There was this idea of more affluent and wealthier kids are getting X, Y services, as opposed to just acknowledging that and saying, well, we can't really compete because these kids are living in more affluence. These school systems said, well, we're going to do that. We're going to have a day go till 5 o'clock because we know our students aren't going home and getting piano lessons and soccer and college tutoring. We're trying to bring it into the school district. One of those examples that we did do a few years ago is with the SAT. When I got elected, only 36% of our 11th graders were taking the SAT. And this is not surprising to many of you, but when you look at the reasons, it's you have to take it on a Saturday, you have to have transportation, you have to pay, even if you can get a fee waiver, you have to know that those exist, and you have to, maybe most insidiously, you have to think you're, quote unquote, college material. And it was one of those things that they said, oh, we can't really control. It's not a school thing, it's an SAT thing. So we worked out a deal with the college board for $1 million, which in a district of our size is pocket change. And we gave every kid the SAT as part of the school day. And in 1 year, we went from 36% completion to 87% completion of the SAT. And it's just one of those obvious like little nudges. And so with the pods, why are we like letting folks leave the school district? Why aren't we bringing them in? Another example of that is virtual instruction. We had obviously 600,000 kids virtually during COVID. We were closed for way too long, which now the data is, validating those of us who said, as the lieutenant governor said last night, we're not killing anybody except maybe these kids' hopes and dreams if you don't bring them back to school. But we realized when we opened school last year, we still had about 50,000 students in a virtual program. It was not geared for success in that it was kind of just haphazardly put together. And actually, the teachers who were in that program were mostly our unvaccinated teachers, because that was the kind of reasonable accommodation for employees who weren't vaccinated. But we've really been intentional this year about building up that program. We're working with Florida Virtual Schools. We just did a $6 million contract with them, and we have 7,000 students enrolled in virtual programs. So instead of saying, leave, go to Opportunities for Youth, go to one of the charter schools, we're saying, no, we can create a virtual program, and we'll work with some of the best providers in the country on this. Another model, and I'll close in a minute, but another model that I just visited um, that I think has a lot of potential, not just in LA, but nationally, is called Portal Schools. And many of you know Frank Baxter, a longtime advocate in LA and around the country, and he's one of the founding board members. And Portal Schools is a micro school partnership with Belkin for their first campus. And so I just was at the ribbon cutting last week, and it's on the Belkin campus. It's about 40 schools, 40 students. And the idea behind Portal Schools is to partner with corporations, giving students opportunity to do CTE pathways and term time internships, et cetera. And I think taking advantage of the state's homeschooling law and virtual instruction law that was born out of COVID. I think there are ways that districts can actually, if you can have a high school campus and as long as under 20% of your enrollment is virtually, you can get state funding for it. So I think these Portal Schools is great, but every time I go to one of these schools, I just want to rip it off and do it within the district. And that's this micro schools example is another one. So the last thing I'll say is, families can't avail themselves of these choices if they don't know they exist. And so I've been pushing and we've really grown. We have now the largest in the country unified enrollment system. So we have all of our district choice programs and district traditional schools, because I've been trying to just philosophically get people to realize if you go to your neighborhood school, that's also a choice, or it should be a choice. It should not be a default. But we're getting charter schools on our platform as well. And both I'm getting flack from both sides. The district doesn't love that we're putting charters on this because they think it's giving them unfair advantage. The charters don't love it because they don't trust the district. And I feel like if I'm getting criticism from both sides, we're doing something right. So that's a big priority of mine, so that families actually know what their choices are and can avail themselves of it. So, I think, like we heard from Winsome last night, I mean, the community is just way farther ahead than policymakers are on this. And so meeting parents where they are, trying to align incentives and just giving permission for people to work together, and acknowledging that, only through this collaboration are we going to be able to serve kids best is what we're focused on in LA, and really appreciate the opportunity to share a few words and learn with all of you over the course of the last 24 hours or so. So thank you. Sure. Yeah, I know, and there's some donors in this room. I mean, I think it was one, these initial interventions were not expensive. It was we'll get to a point where I'd love to help them seat some of these schools, but for that conference I was talking about, I mean, we had about 100 educators that we took to a hotel down in Newport Beach, and bought them dinner and some, pens. And so it was not a really expensive ask. And so bringing them out and then seeing the fruits of that collaboration, like it was kind of that one proof point that led to more. I think also in that instance, what I've been trying to do in LA that is opening the eyes of some of our philanthropic community, but also I think turning heads within the district, is getting donors to invest in traditional systems in a way that they haven't for a long time. And we just actually with Alberto, we just are reviving the LA Unified Foundation to do some of our own fundraising and giving of grants. And so I think that was one of the things that was tough, but when the traditional schools who have always seen the charter schools or the non-traditional models, at least in LA for the last decade, getting the brunt of all this fundraising, to get some of it themselves was really helpful. And just convincing in this case, it was an organization called Great Public Schools Now, which had been a kind of partnership through Broad and a few of the big funders in LA, why it was important, not only to the work for kids, but also just to kind of change the culture of philanthropy. We had LA Unified, the board would deny grants, when they came to the board just for a usually kind of pretty rote, perfunctory approval, deny grants because they were from the billionaires or from the, so thinking, just changing that culture was helpful. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just curious, like what your plan is to find kids that have sort of fallen off of the grid during COVID. I think
Yeah.
a lot of people need to have
Yeah.
something in place.
Yeah, I think it's been priority, 1, 2, and 3 for the superintendent. I mean, we were actually, knocking on doors looking for these kids, leading up to the first week of school, which for us, I mean, we started August 15th. So I know a lot of you are like in your first week or second week of school. We've been at this for a month. I think anecdotally, and I was talking to some of you yesterday really about homeschooling. How do you know how many kids are homeschooling? You don't really. But what we have seen, and we're trying to verify this a little bit, but anecdotally is it really is the combination of all the factors that districts are dealing with around the country. We have lost families at the high end of the economic spectrum. They've left LA for Austin and Jackson Hole and Bozeman. At the lower end of the spectrum, they've either left back to home countries. We've seen immigration obviously slow over the last few years, or they're moving in LA like to the Inland Empire. And out of LA because the cost of living is so high. And I should say too that if you ask the teachers union, they would say 200% of our enrollment decline is due to charter schools. In reality, it's about 35%. 65% of the enrollment decline of 200,000 kids in LA over the last 2 decades is cost of living and demographic trends. We're seeing on the younger end, so then on the older end of the spectrum, we're also seeing kids who are supporting their families. I was talking to some of you yesterday about, well, when you were closed for so long, what about parents who had to work? Well, the older siblings were starting to take care of those younger siblings. A lot of those older siblings are now still just kind of in the shadow workforce, taking care of families, or in the workforce. And on the younger end, California is not mandatory. Kindergarten is not mandatory in California. There are arguments I know on both sides. We're working with the governor on a bill that we think he's going to sign like this week or next that would make it mandatory. But so we don't have the universal pre-K that we need to. We're working on it. We have a lot of families that weren't coming for kindergarten, and then they thought, oh, I'm going to wait another year because I don't feel safe. And so we see some of that. And so we've, every day we've been enrolling more kids. We really have been out knocking on doors and working with families, working with CBOs and nonprofits to get these. Do we have a time for Mark?
Not an easy one.
Then we don't have time for Mark.
Hasn't the pandemic showered your district with money and every other district in the country? So don't you have the resources to do fantastic innovation? And I'm not sure why you need the donors. Except maybe kind of build confidence. But what are you going to do with all that money?
Yeah, no. And just to be clear, the donors, I think some of these innovations weren't large money. It was just things that you wouldn't necessarily think the school district would, or the board would approve, like taking people down to Newport or all that. But, we are pretty flush with cash. I think we have challenges in spending it that are not unique to LA in terms of a lot of districts and a lot of boards, a lot of labor groups want us, us to commit to ongoing costs with one-time funds, which is the recipe for disaster and one of the reasons the district has a structural deficit. So the plan last year from the prior superintendent was hire 6,000 new people, counselors, teachers, despite declining enrollment, hire more people. And not only is that imbalance in terms of students and employees, but it's unsustainable in terms of what happens when the funding dries out. So we've been trying to parse, because we had this structural deficit of $500 million a year with rising pension and healthcare costs, we've been trying to, spend it as intentionally as possible and even get some waivers to spend it not all in one year to make poor decisions, but to save some, 7 years of feast, 7 years of famine. But we are trying to spend it on things that are long overdue. Tutoring, we're trying to do a lot of high dosage tutoring, universal pre-K. We're trying to pay our existing employees. I mean, that was the idea with the pods too. You don't need to hire more people. Pay the existing employees that you have to do more in different innovative work, whether that's teachers' aides or after-school providers. So, there's, when you have resources, everyone's at the trough. And so we have, everything from higher, we have the teachers union right now that despite having a teacher strike 3 years ago is already out in the community polling the community whether they should have another strike. Despite a 5% raise last year and a 10% offer of a raise this year. So, that's the nature of LA politics. But we're using the resources to do things like the universal pre-K expansion, like high dosage tutoring, like some of the CTE pathways and the virtual schooling, and some of the dual enrollment partnerships with community colleges and that. So appreciate it. Thank you all very much for the time.